All right. So, welcome to the Energy Future Forum, sponsored by WELL, which is short for Willits Economic Localization. I am Madge Strong, and I'm chair of the WELL group. We're a nonprofit here in Willits for the past 14 years, I think it is. Among other things, we deal with trying to save energy, trying to save our local environment, local food, local investing, health. This is one of our subjects, and we'd love to have your support of WELL if you haven't already been joining WELL. This particular energy forum is, the theme is what we can do to alleviate the climate catastrophe and at the same time, hopefully, save money. We are pretty much gearing it to local residents, but the same issues come up for government and businesses. And we're also kind of focused locally, but obviously we need solutions at the national level and at the international level because the climate crisis is absolutely here right now. So those of us who are here in this forum want to be part of the solution, and that's what our guests today are going to be talking about. But our two presenters who are here are going to carry the day famously because they know these subjects forward and backwards. We have Geof Syphers, who is the CEO of Sonoma Clean Power since its inception, which was in 2013, and he'll explain why it's a community choice aggregator and what that means for the residents of Mendocino County and also Sonoma County, which are covered by Sonoma Clean Power. And after he gives us some introductory remarks for 10 or 12 minutes, we'll have Keith Rutledge, who is the co-founder and a director of the Renewable Energy Development Institute, known as REDI, here in Willits. And REDI, many years ago, back in 1990, they had one of the first rallies of Solar Expo. So he knows a lot about solar and also a lot about energy conservation and has helped with programs to get Willits and Fort Bragg residents on energy conservation, like even just things as simple as insulating and double pane windows and things of that sort. So each of them will be making some introductory remarks. And after that, we will be opening it up for question and answer. Let's start right off with Geof Syphers.
Thank you, Councilmember Strong. And thanks everyone for being here. I'm looking forward mostly to the back and forth in the Q&A. So I'll keep my comments relatively brief because I think that's the fun part, is when we get to hear what's on your mind. I did at Madge Strong's request put a few slides together to kind of help talk through a few things. So if that's all right, I'll share it. And is that coming up for people?
Yes.
Okay, super. So I think what I wanted to do is gear my presentation toward kind of all the different levels of knowledge about the energy market and energy industry, knowing that there's a handful of experts on this call and knowing there are people who are new to this. So I did want to start by just noting that Sonoma Clean Power is a public power provider, not like a muni exactly, because we don't own the wires. So what's different is that we generate all the electricity for Sonoma and Mendocino counties, or at least for almost all the customers. And but then we essentially lease the wires from PG&E to deliver the power to our customers. And then PG&E does all the billing. So you're all our customers unless you told us you didn't want to be. So we became the default provider of electricity back in 2014 for Sonoma County and 2017, I believe it was, for Mendocino County. And the reason why we were selected to be the default provider is really kind of goes all the way back to PG&E's first bankruptcy, when there was a lot of shenanigans in the energy market, and the regulators and the lawmakers wanted more public oversight They didn't want another Enron disaster. And so they really wanted to have local governments like cities and counties with good transparency overseeing the purchasing and selling of electricity and the generation. So that's what came about. And so we got our program off the ground in 2014. Got an elected board of directors. We're serving about 500,000 people in terms of businesses and residents. And we're one of 16 so-called community choice providers around California. And what community choice really refers to is that communities, through their elected officials, get to choose what kind of power sources they have. And it doesn't refer to individual choice. And I think that's an often misunderstanding. It's really about city council members and supervisors sitting on boards that oversee our operations, making choices about how aggressively to go after renewable energy. And you'll see in these slides that for us, that's a pretty aggressive approach. So I just wanted to give a little quick kind of summary of our evolution. And when we very first launched, our goal was to build a lot of solar and wind power. And it wasn't really anything else. And so we did go out and build a pretty staggering amount. It was about $1.5 billion of solar and wind power fairly quickly. And what we realized was that was great. But in some ways, that was the easy part because there was a playbook for it. The market kind of knew how to help us do this. And this photo gives you a scale of some of the wind turbines we were able to build, which is just staggering. And what we very quickly learned was that we really needed to add to that mission. So later the same year, we launched a service called Evergreen. And this is something that any one of you can sign up for if you go to sonomacleanpower.org. And it's kind of our entry-level step into deep sustainability. And it was the first electric service in the entire United States that provided 100% local renewable energy 24 hours a day, every single day of the year with no exceptions. So we had no reliance on any fossil fuel source for any minute of the year. And the way we did it is we started with solar and geothermal power. And what we're adding to it is a lot of battery power and demand response. And I'll tell you a little more about demand response later. And what's exciting is that became the template for the state of California to change public policy for all the other electric providers in the state. And so Evergreen became a kind of beacon of what was possible. And this is pretty neat because we're able to provide this service, which is incredibly premium. It's 100% made in Mendocino and Sonoma counties from exclusively renewable power. And we're able to do it for somewhere between $10 and $25 a month premium. $25 would be for a pretty big house using a lot of AC. In my small condo, my premium is about $6 a month for geothermal and solar power with batteries. So this was a kind of neat early evolution in terms of trying to lead on climate issues. What came the next year was we really started to think about the fact that if you can turn up or turn down how fast different appliances are using energy, you can supply all kinds of benefits to the grid in terms of keeping the lights on, but you can also decarbonize the grid. So if, for example, you're using a water heater that has heat pump technology instead of natural gas, which I call fossil methane, then you can actually decide to run that heat pump when there's a lot of solar energy on the grid. And then you can coast through the hours when the grid doesn't have any solar power, and you can still have plenty of hot water. So one of the things that we're able to help customers do with Grid Savvy is automatically manage those kinds of resources so that you don't have to think about it. You can just sign up for this and get some financial benefits back into your account and get paid to help decarbonize the grid. So that was the next evolution. And in 2016, we really clearly identified that the transition to getting off of gasoline and helping customers figure out how to get into electric cars when they were able to was a key objective. So for 3 years, we ran programs to incentivize cars. And following that, and ever since, we've run programs to provide deeply discounted home electric car chargers and also channel tens of millions of dollars into regional commercial car charging stations out in the public. And so this became really, really valuable because it's sort of the triple win. The two that are obvious is you cut use of gasoline and all those emissions, and you also lower the cost of car ownership and driving really dramatically. So if you drive, for example, on 100% local renewable power with Evergreen, you're spending less than $2.50 a gallon equivalent on your car in terms of fuel. And I think you've all seen that fuel costs are $5 something a gallon around California. But the third thing that's not so intuitive is if you can time the charging of your car to be really valuable to the grid instead of harmful, we can actually use the time of car charging to provide a service to California to keep the lights on. And so charging, again, in the middle of the day at work and places when it's very sunny and the sun is shining, that turns out to be a real benefit because right now, sometimes there's so much solar power in California, we just end up sending it to Arizona or some other state and paying them to take it. And it's just a big loss in terms of money and even climate benefits. And so finding ways to use it that's high value, like charging a car, is really great. And in 2018, following the first round of mega fires we had here in 2017, Sonoma Clean Power was able to launch a program to help folks rebuild their homes. We did it in a partnership with PG&E and our local air boards, and we provided up to $17,500 to help people rebuild their houses. And that involved putting solar on the roof, putting car charging in the garage if you had one, using deep energy efficiency and so forth. And then we had a huge amount of hand-holding, getting through the permitting process and helping people get through that. In 2020, we opened a center, and this might be one of the takeaways I want people to remember. The Advanced Energy Center is now open in downtown Santa Rosa. So it's at 431 E Street. And I know it's a distance from Willits, but I know sometimes folks get down here to shop once a week or occasionally. And I encourage people to stop in. And there's a couple websites here. The first is SCP advancedenergycenter.org. And that's really our kind of welcome mat to the Energy Center. And what this place is the first facility that we know of in the world that's 100% dedicated to decarbonizing all homes and hooking up people with the right technologies, the contractors, all of the incentives that are available, and 0% financing to make retrofits. The second website, cleanenergy.gov, was just launched a week or two ago, and that's the White House's effort to explain every single incentive that came out of the infrastructure bill, but more significantly, the Inflation Reduction Act that was just recently signed, and to make it specific to your personal situation. So for example, some of those tax credits are income qualified, and some of the tax credits can be cashed out as a grant if you don't pay enough taxes. if you pay a low enough income or if you have low enough tax appetite. That website explains everything that's in it. And we had a question just prior to the call about whether or not somebody doing a solar expansion on their house should do it now or should wait until January of next year to get it started. And one good piece of news is that legislation actually ensured that the extension of the 30% solar tax credit would be immediate and would not have to wait for January of next year. But it's true that quite a few of those tax credits and benefits do kick in starting January 1 of 2023. But if there's anything to write down, it'd be both the Sonoma Clean Power Advanced Energy Center website and cleanenergy.gov, because I think those are going to be really good resources, and we can come back to that if people want. And then I think my last slide, unless people want to hear me drone on, is that just last year we launched a pretty exciting effort to construct 500 megawatts of new geothermal capacity in Mendocino and Sonoma County alone. And that's pretty dramatic. So between 1950 something and 1988, about 750 megawatts or so of geothermal was built in Sonoma, Mendocino, and Lake counties. And what we want to do is add 500 megawatts to that in a pretty short order, like in about a decade. And the reason is we're finding that no matter how much solar and wind and batteries we add, we're never going to turn off any natural gas fired power plants ever until we have baseload renewables. And the reason is all those natural gas fired power plants that we have today are going to be kept online running at least at their minimum setting all of the time, every single day, 24 hours a day, just in case it's not windy and it's dark and the batteries run out. And that's how the system is operated. And so what we're finding is if we really want to solve our climate crisis and get off of fossil methane and make the transition to electric cars and electrify our homes and do everything we need to do, we're going to need to add a lot of baseload 24-hour renewable energy. And so in our region, geothermal is one of these exciting opportunities. And what's really cool is this cartoon, this graphic is showing what just one of the three vendors that we're working with is playing around with. And so Ever is a Canadian company, and we're also working with a couple other companies. And what Ever is proposing to do is drill fairly deep wells or just even extend existing wells and then make them closed loop. And so this is the new concept, the new technology that hasn't been available up until the last few years. And that what's important about that is it means in theory, and so far with a couple of demonstrations in practice, they can inject water into the ground and then collect the steam and condense it and put all of that water back into the ground without loss. So in the Western United States, we're drought starved. We don't have a lot of water. And so the idea of having a closed loop geothermal process that doesn't require endless inputs of water is extremely exciting. And so we're pursuing this very aggressively. We really want to see the potential to extract heat from the earth and be able to shut down those fossil fuel plants once and for all, and have justification for closing Diablo Canyon once and for all, the nuclear power plant still going that the governor extended. And I think what I'll do is stop there because that's plenty of time, and turn it back to you, Councilmember Strong, and we can go on either to questions now or to Keith and come back. So let us know what works.
Yeah, well, my original thought was that we would have Keith go ahead next, But if anyone has something very specific to Geoff's presentation and it's fresh in your mind, let's have a few minutes for questions now. I see Judy Luria.
Yeah, Geof, I think it's nice to have questions at the end, but with both of you, but you used a term that I didn't understand, and that was base load.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe you could explain that.
Yeah, so let me start with solar power. So solar power is now the most economic way to produce electricity on planet Earth. It's pretty staggering. The success of solar power between the late 70s and today is just phenomenal. And the difficulty with that is that we now have a fair amount of solar power, and all of it, of course, only produces when the sun is shining. And so not a lot of good planning went in advance to figure out how to make it valuable. For example, with daytime electric vehicle charging at workplaces, which makes it immensely valuable because you have some place to put all that solar power. And not a lot of good planning went into what are we going to do in the winter at night when everybody's running heat pumps to heat their houses and there's no sun, and some of those days there's no wind, and the batteries might only last 4, maybe 6, maybe 8 hours at most, and then the batteries are out. So I think what baseload power does is it provides renewable energy all of the time. So what baseload is referring to is 24 hours a day, every single day of the year. So examples are geothermal. Offshore wind comes close. Offshore wind runs about 80+% of the time, because when you're 5 miles offshore, the wind blows pretty strong most of the time. Biomass can run 24 hours a day. Landfill gas, small stream hydropower that isn't using dams, so run-of-the-river hydropower. These are these really tiny ones. Things like that can be baseload. Small stream hydro can be baseload, but in some places it's not because it's seasonal. So that's a little bit more iffy. Depends on where you are. So the big ones in California, though, for the future are probably just geothermal and offshore wind, because those two have the potential to scale up to pretty big numbers. Biomass is going to be useful, but will probably always be a little bit small, and has some concerns about, whether or not it can be clean enough. So there's some issues with that. And landfills, we're trying to keep the compost out of landfills. So the less compost we send there, the less gas there's going to be. So if we're successful, that means that power source goes away. So anyway, but base load means 24 hours a day, every day of the year.
Thank you.
Okay, and I see Eileen has her hand up. Eileen?
Hi, Geof. Thanks for being here. You had said that we should be charging our electric cars during, it sounded like what you were saying is high production of energy during the day when we're putting out a lot of solar energy. We have electric cars that we charge at night because of the time of use costs. So could you clear that up? Because it would be nice if we didn't have to pay. I guess we have battery too, so we could use our batteries to do that. But typically we are in the habit of charging during the night. Thanks.
You're doing the right thing, given all the signals you've been given. And so what's happening is that as of today, charging your car at night still isn't a bad idea from a cost standpoint. However, it's a terrible idea from a carbon standpoint. Nighttime power is almost entirely natural gas right now, especially in the early night, like between 10 and midnight. which is when most people are turning their car chargers on. And they're doing that for good reason, because the rates are telling them to do that. And we're advocating strongly, and we're making some good progress on trying to get rates that recognize that for about 9 months out of the year, and this is everything except August, September, and October, it would be phenomenal if people charge their cars between about 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. or 11 and 3, because the wholesale price of electricity in most of those months is close to zero and is often negative, which means we ought to be able to give you power for free or really close to free. And so the group that needs to rubber stamp that is the California Public Utilities Commission, because they control everything about rates. And even if we set a generation rate that was zero for that time period, you'd still pay a fortune to charge your car because you'd be paying PG&E for transmission and delivery during those hours. But the truth is we need a place to put all that power, and electric cars is one of the best places to put it. They're very flexible. They don't care when you charge them, as long as they get charged, right? So I think that's an objective that we have, to make those price signals better. It is already better than it was 2 years ago. So if you haven't looked at rates recently, you might check one more time and see that the kind of middle of the day rates are getting much lower than they used to be for time of use rates. We want that to get even better. So I'll stop there, because I know Madge Strong has admonished me to be more brief, and I'm not very good at being brief. Sorry.
Okay. I've been an alternate on the Sonoma Clean Power Board, so I've heard some of the ins and outs. And I think one of the things I really admire about Sonoma Clean Power is they do advocate in the legislature and at the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, for environmentally sound policy and savings for the customers. So that's another benefit of having our Sonoma Clean Power be our power provider. Okay, I think it's time to bring Keith on. He has a system here with his video separate from his audio. So you're going to see his picture, and he might also show some slides, but you won't see his mouth moving. You'll just hear him.
Excellent. All right, thanks everybody. And Geof, thank you. I'll just tag on to the end. I was going to ask a question. I decided to wait and just do it right now. But storage is a big part of what you're talking about. And you mentioned batteries. I think we have some real interesting opportunities for other types of storage, like pumped hydro, for example. We have lots of elevation. We could use a lot of water at elevation for a lot of different reasons throughout, especially Northern California. But also making ice, making heat. And these have been done, thermal storage, ice storage has been done in various applications. So I think there's a lot of other things other than storing electricity per se that we could also even out that grid. So I just wanted to toss that out. Basically what I wanted to talk about tonight is sort of focus on what we can do as individuals. We all want the big picture. We know the world needs a lot of things. So what I think is really important, and I spend a lot of my time working with individual people on their home, is how can you take the money you're currently spending on energy in your home and invest that in energy saving and in our case also climate positive kinds of investments to do the right thing, but also do it because you can afford to, because you've got money, cash flow to do that. So basically what I want to look at is identifying everything we can do on our home, and I'm preaching to the choir, I know, because I can see a lot of people I know. But even then, all of our houses exist now, the housing stock, the new opportunities, building codes and such are great. But 80% of what's here today is going to be here for a long time. We need to really focus on what we can do at home. And so once you calculate, how much energy you really need after you get through your efficiency aspects, you can then look at the kinds of equipment that can do that kind of saving, and then look at the dollars that would take to both purchase but also for the savings to figure out whether you could finance that or not. So I'm just going to run through this quickly. I'll make this slideshow available. I'll send it to Well, so you can have it, because there's a lot of information here. I'm not going to go through everything in detail, but again, I wanted to focus on what can you do in your home, and what can you and your neighbor do in your neighborhood to start doing things really locally. This is so important, just like recycling and some other things we've done. Amory Lovins coined that term negawatts. One of the best things we can do is practices. Turn the light switch off. Don't do something if you don't need to. Figure out a way to do it without energy if you can. So negawatt means it's something that it's the cheapest possible electricity because you don't need the wattage. And so, but rather than building and using efficient whatever, if you don't need to do something, turn that switch off, turn that light off, make sure that you're minimizing. I think for most of us, our biggest loads are heating and cooling, and I think cooling is becoming a bigger issue. It has been in my 70 years, seeming like it's getting a little warmer. I'm probably getting a little older and like to have an air conditioner too, but insulating your building, dual pane windows, all these things, if you haven't done these things, these are the quickest payback, the most important kinds of things to do, and most of these are low cost, no cost, practices for primarily, or very inexpensive things like insulation on your water heater tank or flow restricting valves and such. I made a note here at the bottom that water is the largest user of electricity in California. And so brook trails, for example, or the city of Willits, there's a lot of water pumping going on. So even though you're not using energy at your house when that water comes out of the spigot, the system is using a lot of energy. So water conservation ties right back into energy conservation. And again, I'm not going to go through all these various, but you can sort of see the general idea. So once you figure out what you want to do that you can do right now, practically, easily, you've probably already done a lot of that stuff. Now start looking at what is your real load? How much energy do you really need? What size heating system, or let's say if you're adding on an air conditioner, what size does it need to be? Need to go through that sort of calculation. And there's actually a bunch of interesting energy audit forms online. I thought about pulling some up, but PG&E has something. I don't know, Geof, maybe Sonoma Clean Power has something to just sort of walk you through these steps so you can identify what your loads are. So at the end of the day, you're saying, well, really, I need this many kilowatt hours a year. We're looking at trying to move more into electricity and away from gas to decarbonize. So the more we can implement electrical improvements like a hot heat pump for hot water or for your heating and cooling loads, things like that. We'll talk about that. Geof mentioned that as well. And we already talked about electric vehicles. Again, you need to figure out how often do you drive. I live off the grid. I've got a Nissan Leaf. I drive back and forth to town. I only do that once or twice a week, and so it's easy for me to charge my electric vehicle off my solar energy system when I'm regulating, when I've already charged my batteries here. And again, going back to water as being another energy-related item, even though you might not think about it at your house, unless you have a well. So then how are you going to power these things? How are we going to get those savings? I'm working on a project right now for myself, for my wife Nancy and I, and doing some remodeling on an old 40s, 50s kind of style house. It has those giant electric coil heaters in the wall and stuff. It's got one little gas heater. But we're looking at heat pumps. Many of you have those mini split air conditioner and or heater. You can also get those that are ducted. You can get it to even fit into an existing HVAC system. But that's really, again, your biggest dollar spending is in your house heating and cooling. So the more money you can put into the envelope and fixing your house up, it's a great investment anyway for real estate, but it also is more comfortable, and that's where you're going to save the most. Hot water, we talked about the heat pump. Even looking at things like remote small cabinet units, if you have a sink that's a long way from your water heater, that can save on energy. If you have quite a few fittings, even a recirculation kind of system can work there. So again, these are a lot of strategies. I'm not going to go through each of these, but and I would encourage you to pick one or two. Don't be overwhelmed by the fact there's so many things. But even just cleaning a refrigerator regularly saves a ton of money. If you haven't cleaned it regularly, I looked at one that hadn't been cleaned in so long, I couldn't believe how bad it was. It looked like it had a filter in front of the condenser, but no, it was just the stuff that had built built up into a mat. So it's very important to keep things as clean as you possibly can. And water storage, again, putting that down there, and solar. We'll talk a little bit about solar. So these are the kinds of things to evaluate on your particular situation. What size do you need? How much energy is it going to save? If you're really frugal, some of these things you might not make a whole lot of sense because you're already barely spending any money for energy. On the other hand, if you have a big family, big house, you might be spending a couple $100 a month or more in utility bills, and these things will have a payback. And that's the most important thing to consider, is that the money that we're putting in is money we could be using to pay for improvements. So this is sort of the finance walkthrough of, if you don't do anything, business as usual, you just keep paying your utility bills. And whenever I talk with somebody, they ask, well, how long will it take to pay for itself, things like that. And I say, well, if you can tell me what your electricity bill will be for the next 20 years, I can then estimate what the savings would be. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, what's the price of electricity going to be in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years? I mean, with this transmission, distribution, undergrounding, who knows all the various things that are going to be happening going beyond what Sonoma Clean Power even can deal with. There's going to be a lot of costs. So that money could go, if you're not using that energy, that money could be invested elsewhere. So I'm just going to use a very simplistic example to just give the flavor for this, that if you could save 50% of that bill, a $200 a month bill with a 5% escalation rate runs about $80,000 over 20 years. So if you could save about half of that, you can invest about $40,000 over that 20 years and come out basically break even. In other words, rather than spending that money to pay PG&E and others, you can put it into an investment in your own home. Now, if you have cash, or if you can get 0% financing, which does exist in some cases, and I think there'll be more of that, you can basically turn that 5% escalation rate into earnings on your cash, or at least you can reach a break even in a short amount of time. And I've got a little chart to sort of illustrate that. Clearly, financing, though, is important. So home loans have the best interest, even though it's going up. It's still historically low. I mean, even at 5, 6, 7%, it's way cheaper than it's been in decades. So it's a great time to invest in your home equity line of credit even. We've already talked about briefly that there are new tax incentives and cash rebates coming. And thank you, Geof, for that site, the cleanenergy.gov for the federal aspects. But both Sonoma Clean Power and PG&E have a lot of information about rebates to lower the initial cost of some of these things. And that's going to be. I haven't even really gotten a full handle on everything that's going to happen next year, but there's a bunch of money coming down, so it's a great time to be considering all these, and that goes for efficiency as well, for insulation and weather stripping and double glazed windows and all of those things. And clearly, the switch from fossil fuels to electric vehicles is something that we're all wanting to do. It's going to put a strain on the grid if we don't figure out a way to do that. So again, the more you can generate your own power, the better. But it's something that really pays for itself. That electric vehicle using solar electricity compared to the cost of fuel, especially now, the cost of fuel and all the maintenance on fossil vehicles. Also, making your own power, and this is something in my business world, is stability, the security, the fact that you can have, if you have batteries, there aren't things such as power outages per se. If you have enough backup, if you have your own power taken care of, you can, not only is it to have that backup, but it's just your price is going to be more stable over time. You're not going to be subject to future price shocks from whatever happens. We don't know what the future might hold for the grid. And then lastly, any investment that you put into all this is going to increase your home value, whether you're going to sell it or it's just better for you, more comfortable, healthier. And your property taxes don't go up because solar equipment on your home is exempt from property tax, and most of these improvements are also exempt unless you do a major addition or some other kind of a major project. You shouldn't have any difference in your property taxes. So I wanted to sort of close with this graphic to give you a better feel for what I'm talking about, which is the red line there is starting in year one, you spend $1,200, and that's half of that utility bill. So I'm saying if you took half of your utility bill for your savings, that $1,200 in year one, and you run it all the way through, you're going to spend close to $80,000 over that 20-year period. So that's if you don't do anything, if the price of electricity goes up 5% and your bill's about $200 a month. Now, if you save that $100 and you invest it either at 0% or with cash, that's the green line, that you have a little negative cash flow because you're still having to pay in those earlier years, but along around year 10 or 11, you're getting into positive cash flow. And really, cash flow is what it's all about in the end, because you don't have a rate of return on your utility bill. There is no payback on paying your utility bill. You just pay and pay and pay. So anywhere you can cross that black line and reach a break even, that means you basically it's paid for itself. Now, even financing, if you just wanted to reach a break even to say, I want to spend the same amount of money I would have spent, but I want to invest it in renewables and in electric vehicles or heat pumps or green technology, and I'm still going to spend that amount of money. It's not like we're all going to suddenly get rich by not having to spend any money. It's going to cost money for energy, but you can invest it rather than giving it away to somebody else. So even though there's maybe a 20-year break even, the key to this is you look at year 7, right about year 7, where you would have been paying about $1,500 in that year. Now you're going to start paying less and less and less every year. So again, positive cash flow at about year 7, even in that case where it takes 20 years to pay for itself. So this, I think this kind of visually helps people to see, do I really want to keep paying forever and not get anything, or can I take some of this money that I would have spent otherwise and invest it in some of these energy-saving technologies, do something better for the planet, make an investment in my home, be healthier, be more comfortable, and have something that pays for itself. So I think I'll stop there and we can take questions. Thanks.
Keith, I just got to say, we got to grab lunch, brother. I want to testify. Well said.
Okay, so Keith, you need to stop the screen share so we can
That's what I'm doing.
go back to.
There we go. That should do it.
Okay.
Stop the share.
Okay, great. So everybody else who's on here now, and I am going to see if anybody has some questions for our speakers. I have a few questions, but let me get questions from other people. This has been really very interesting. So Steve and Annie, did you have, yeah, why don't you go next?
A couple of questions for Geof. Number one, is there any hope for the PUC?
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm going to quote, Kip Lipper is the chief consultant to the Senate leader in California. And I once asked him that question. And he said, well, every time we reform them, it gets worse. So I'll be candid. I think it's a difficult conundrum to reform the Public Utilities Commission. And I think it's difficult for a lot of reasons. One is it's based in San Francisco, which is crazy expensive to live in. And so anytime somebody gets really good at the PUC, they get poached by some utility that can pay them twice the salary somewhere else. So all the great people get stolen. Mm-hmm. Second, there's a 12-month prohibition on going to work for the utility you just regulated, which is not very long. And that's a federal law. California can't change that. That's a First Amendment law. So we've seen people go from earning $100,000 at the commission to earning 1.2 million at a utility the next year. That's really hard to overcome. And I don't have a solution for it. It's really, really hard. And third, the commission is subject to a tremendous amount of pressure to deliver on unrealistic goals. So let's say Governor Brown and then Governor Newsom wanted to have like phenomenal headlines around renewable development. The thing that they tell the commission is go do this, but make sure rates don't go up. So how do you do that? So now they tell the utilities go do this, but don't increase your rates. And then the utilities say, okay, but that means I'm not going to do safety anymore. and then that leads to fires. So you have like this whole ecosystem of bad structure. And I think in a lot of ways, if I could have a wand and say, like, let's try something else, I think it would probably be to have the CPUC have all their decisions be reviewable and appealable by the Attorney General. And right now they're not. And just say, like, what if you could have a completely independent Justice Department say, like, no, you made the wrong decision. Like, you don't get to charge ratepayers $18 billion extra because you wanted to. So that's a long-winded answer, but it's a gigantic problem. And it's probably more fundamental than the problem of management at PG&E, because PG&E is just a for-profit company. They're just going to do anything they can do to make more money. That's what a for-profit company does. And so really the onus on us, I think, as a state is to regulate them properly. And I think your question's better than my answer. And I think you should keep asking it to everyone you can think of.
Okay, I do have a second. I'm sorry. So I do have a second question. And let me know if it's out of the territory we should be discussing here. Do you guys go north into Humboldt County?
No, and we don't have to, because Redwood Coast Energy Authority is there. They're our sister agency, and they're doing a phenomenal job. And in fact, they're leading the state's efforts to build offshore wind. And right now they're looking at building potentially 4,400 megawatts of offshore wind, which would be enough for maybe 30% of California's offshore wind needs just in Humboldt County. So they're really going aggressive on trying to solve this kind of climate issue, because there's probably only two places in the whole state that can have it. There's the Central Coast, which is kind of south of Monterey, and there's Humboldt Bay. And those two spaces have been the only identified places to do offshore wind. So Humboldt's got their own agency, and we're happy to work with them on anything, but we're not serving them.
Okay, well, I'll quickly wrap up then. I just heard last few days, PG&E has announced up there, they're not going to add any more capacity for transmission into the county. So Humboldt becomes a, whatever you call it, a test case for what renewables can do.
Yeah, let me qualify that a little. What PG&E, I think, said, what I've read is they've said their transmission line is overloaded, and they're nervous and about adding any new capacity that feeds back into the grid. For example, any new homes, any new businesses, any new solar, any new car charging, etc. And that's a horrible failure in planning, in my opinion, because to hear that now instead of to hear that we're worried about this 5 years from now is a big problem. So what's now being considered is what are all the stopgap measures to solve that problem over the next 3 to 5 years while PG&E can upgrade their transmission lines. And truthfully, I think this could affect Willits. Willits has a 60 kilovolt line that serves it independently from Humboldt. And so I think Willits proper is probably okay. But I think everything north of Willits, and there are a few people who live between Willits and Humboldt County, not too many people, but there's a few out there, are in the same boat, I think, as all of southern Humboldt County. And I think I just spent an hour on the phone with the director of Humboldt County's program today about this issue, and we're actively working on this. So I hope to be able to report back better news next time we meet So I don't think it's they're not going to provide new transmission. I think it's that they're unable to serve new load now. But PG&E makes a 12% profit, which is pretty handsome on all new transmission work. So like they're pretty motivated to build new transmission. So I think we can push them to do that.
Thank you.
I see Keith has his hand up. So Keith, take it away.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, actually, Geof, I wanted to sort of pick up on some of this back to storage again, because it really seems like that's the part of the issue. Two things that I think Sonoma Clean Power might be able to help with. One is community solar, as far as people that live where they don't have sunshine on their property for whatever reason, or they live in an apartment, or they're a renter, or they're whatever, but they're still paying utility rates, but they have no ability to take advantage of these incredible solar energy things. Now, they can buy the evergreen power and such, but is there a way to rate base a community solar where somebody could actually have some kind of ownership interest in some block of solar? And then along with that, distributed storage as a similar kind of thing of having a battery pack at a person's home that can say, do you want a 4-hour battery, an 8-hour battery, a 12-hour battery? You pay this much on the tariff and you get this storage component, but it's a smart storage. So you're interacting with the grid, sort of like an intermittent load kind of a situation where you agree you can use it for storage. I mean, you mentioned cars, and if we integrated cars and houses as storage, it's storage. But anyway, those are two things, community solar and community storage. Do you see any role for Sonoma Clean Power, and could that get through the PUC as a tariff?
I'm going to bullishly say yes. So we're working on both those aspects right now. And the reason I'm going to say yes instead of qualifying it is the need for that was so utterly demonstrated last week in the heat wave. So I made 60 phone calls in 3 days to try and get people to turn on diesel generators just to keep the lights on, which made me sick to my stomach because that is not my job. My job is to solve the climate crisis. And we shut down, or we delayed, I should say, the sewage treatment at 5 sewage treatment plants during peak hours, which created all kinds of stress for the operators. They were like, oh my God, the sewage is building up in our ponds and all the rest, and what are we gonna do? And all I could think of was, if I just had 10 megawatts of battery storage behind the meter at a switch, I could have just turned it on and had the same effect of calling up. It was probably over 100 people on Labor Day to leave their families and go babysit generators and do things at sewage treatment plants and it was just like, what are we doing? Like, California is falling apart. And so, you know, this week, I told my team, I'm like, go figure out how to build 10 megawatts times at least 4 hours of battery storage and put it on customer sites, like public sites where there's a benefit, like schools and city, you know, sites and county sites, and figure out like how to create a dispatchable resource like that. So Keith, I'm with you. I think we have to figure out how to have these distributed resources that don't require this 7-year planning process. Because right now, I mean, this is a little bit in the weeds, but like, if we proposed just a 10 megawatt resource in one chunk that we own and put on the grid, that goes through a 5 to 7 year planning process right now. If we can put it at 20 different schools that already have solar, there's no planning process. It just goes, it happens. And so we're really trying to figure out, how do we accelerate this solution? Because we don't have 5 to 7 years. I mean, the truth is Governor Newsom called us to task, every single electric provider in the state, and said, we have to keep the lights on. And my fear is that he and every other lawmaker think they can do that next summer and the summer after that and the summer after that. And my view is that we got maybe one more shot at that, where they can send they sent an Amber Alert to every cell phone in California that said save energy. And it was phenomenal. We saved 2,000 megawatts of power in 10 minutes because people responded. But how many times more can you get those Amber Alerts before you start saying, screw you, like solve the problem? So I think you're spot on, Keith. I think we got to get a ton more storage out there, and you're right, it's not all batteries. I'm really excited about what Lake County's playing around with. Lake County's got this tank to tank model where they've got a giant water tank down low and a giant water tank up high. They're going to pump the water up during solar hours. They're going to drain it down during the hours where they need the power. And they're going to put it in areas where they need firefighting capacity so they can actually use the water to fight wildland fires if they need it. Super exciting. And I'm watching that really closely. I want to think about southeastern Mendocino County for a place for something like that, and northeastern Sonoma County. I think we might find some use for that.
I see Beth has some comment in the chat. Beth, do you want to actually say this over, in your own voice, or shall I read what you put in the chat?
Well, I can do it. Realizing that water is becoming unreliable. I mean, we almost run out of water in different places. I find that Lake County with the lake, it makes obvious sense to me, but many other places, even in Willits, I think depending on water becoming a way of depending on energy storage and working with it that way, when at the same time we're good this year, but there's been other years and there will be other years in the future when we're not sure we have that much water. So trying to depend on it for energy, depending on it as an energy resource and being able to drink it is sort of I think it's picking on a source that isn't that stable to start with. So if we can find something else, I think we're better off. And I
agree, Beth. I agree. And so two quick observations. One is the most water intensive way we have of making power so far in the US is natural gas. And I don't know if people are aware of that, but natural gas fired power plants use a staggering amount of water. And the second is nuclear power. So the amount of water that flows through nuclear power plants is pretty phenomenal. What Lake County's playing around with is a completely closed loop system where, yes, it might take 30 million gallons of water to fill the tanks to start, but you could do that in a wet year. So you could actually wait for a wet year to fill the tanks. And then you would never have to fill them again until you have a wildfire and you discharge the tanks when it's really high value. So I'm excited about this kind of smart use of water where it's like one time or extremely rare or wet season only. But anything west of the Mississippi is going to be extremely dicey when it comes to water. So I agree.
So that water that's stored is sort of like a big battery that doesn't discharge until you need it.
So the Lake County experiment, they call it flashes, and I wish I could remember what that stood for. It's an acronym. But the concept is there's two large steel tanks, one down low and one up high, and there's a pipe in between and a pump. And you fill the tank down low one time in a wet year. And then during peak solar hours, you pump the water up the hill. And then when you need the power, you let it flow down. And then you keep going back and forth over and over and over again for maybe 5, 6, 7 years in a row until you have a fire. Then you fill up the helicopters and the trucks and everything else, and then you refill it after the fire. So that's the concept.
Have you noticed that Lake County has a lot of fires?
I have. Apparently we do too. You and I, Mendocino and Sonoma.
Yes, I think we all do, but I think, they win as far as having the record of the most. Ours may just be bigger when we finally have them.
I remember the Mendocino complex fire. That was the August complex, I think it was called. That was, yeah.
It's big.
Don't want to see that one again.
Yeah. Which is, yeah, it's interesting how oh yeah, and I see Robin's hand up. Go ahead, Robin.
Now I have three very pedestrian and personal questions, so I'll just say them all. I think they're for Keith, but someone else may have an answer too. And my first is that I had the people come out and do energy audits of my home twice in the last 10 years. And every time I was offered a free refrigerator and low flow shower heads. And what I really needed to get my escaping heat down was weather stripping on doors and windows. So, and I couldn't get that from them. So I tried doing it myself. I'm not really good at it. And I'm wondering if there's some source to get free public classes on weather stripping and a demonstration of what kind of weather stripping is going to work, what width and how to make it kind of weather tight. So that's question number one. Number two is I'm really intrigued by doing backup power with batteries. And I remember in the old days having 2 solar panels and a car battery to store the energy. And it seemed like there were environmental problems with having to replace your batteries every 3 to 5 years. So I'm wondering if the technology has gotten better since then for battery storage. And my third question is about heat pumps. And on your list, it said you could run a refrigerator with a heat pump. And I think other things were mentioned too. And I'd like to hear a little more about that, if you would. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Robin. REDI did the Home Energy Link program for a bunch of years in Willits and also a bunch of years in Fort Bragg. And really what you were just saying is exactly the thing we found, is that there are both programs that are available, but also what people really need is assistance at, even just figuring out how to fill out forms sometimes, but also with how to do things for yourself. One of the things we did was a weatherization workshop where we would invite, somebody would host, and we would bring people over to their house, and we already had things prepped for them to do. So we knew, weather stripping or caulking or all those low flow shower head, all those kind of things were there. And we talked about them, and then we went around and did that and installed things, and people got to get the hands on for, as you say, several different types of weather stripping depending on the application, and also things like caulking, how to use a caulk gun. Just pretty simple stuff, but it was fun, and there's some food and people are hanging out. Now, this was before COVID, so, it's like you could actually go to somebody's house and do something, and hopefully we'll get there again. But anyway, that's the idea, is that, and then we would have a drawing for who wants to have the next weatherization party. And of course, people were excited to be the host for the next one. And, it made it fun. So that'd be something we're thinking about. We never did it in the Brook Trail subdivision. And so that's something. But anyway, North Coast Energy Services is really the best provider for all of the various programs for low and moderate income weatherization, and they can do things like weather stripping and such. Sometimes it's difficult because the condition of your door jamb or your windows or whatever might be such that it needs some kind of carpentry work as well as weather stripping, so it's not just as easy as putting in weather stripping. And we found that a lot with having to sort of rebuild doors or windows or things before we could actually install the weather stripping, especially in Fort Bragg. But anyway, so I don't know about having a hands-on workshop anytime soon, but North Coast Energy Services in Ukiah, you should definitely call them. They could send somebody out and take a look because they do have their weatherization programs. And again, there will be more funding next year, I'm sure. As far as battery storage, and I can let Geof talk to it as well, but I've lived off the grid since '84. I've got a battery that's over 20 years old. It's a big industrial lead acid battery, flooded cells. It's really important that you invest your money in the batteries. I mean, people put their money in some panels and then they get a car battery or some smaller battery and they just won't last for a household kind of application. These really big industrial batteries are used for marine applications or forklifts, things like that, and house loads for them are very light. But you do have to maintain them. You have to charge them properly. You have to watch the water level in them. So it is a maintenance issue that people aren't used to because you just aren't used to having to check that kind of stuff. The newer lithium-ion type of batteries, you get around that, and they have a lot bigger usage per capacity. They don't have to be watered. I have questions about how long they're going to last as far as cycle life. That might be an issue. But, the Tesla wall, people see that. Or the latest, greatest is just packaged systems with lithium batteries. But there are technology improvements in battery storage, even to the point of having solid-state batteries. And that's going to be sort of the ultimate electron storage device. But, again, we'll see tremendous increases in battery storage technology, but that shouldn't keep you from purchasing a battery. In fact, I'm getting ready to buy a big battery, about a 40, 50 kilowatt hour battery pack, and I'm going to go ahead and use the lead acid batteries. You can recycle the lead. It's not a toxic thing for the environment per se, and they have a really long life. They're really dependable and serviceable. I just don't know if you can get that out of a lithium pack yet. I've had a lot of lithium batteries that I've worked with. And then lastly, on heat pumps, I'm very excited about heat pumps for both heating and cooling and for domestic hot water. And actually, a refrigerator is a heat pump. I mean, basically, that's what it's doing. And Geof, why don't you talk maybe about the laundry kind of stuff as well? And I mean, dishwashers, whatever. There's all kinds of associated heat pump kind of technology. Batteries, too, if you want to say something there. Thanks.
Yeah. One thing I might offer is I think there is a massive spectrum on what folks can do to provide backup power or backup energy. And I want to begin at the dirt simple end of the spectrum, which is where I started, which is people who are concerned about public safety power shutoffs or short-term power outages that might last 1 or 2 or 3 days. They can put a gallon or a couple of gallons of water in the freezer, especially if you know an outage might be coming. Pour off a little bit, cap it, freeze it, and when the outage happens, put those in the fridge, and your fridge will be fine for 2 to 3 days if you don't open it very often. That's the starting point. That's like what you do if you don't have any money. I would say next step up would be get a $1,500 to $2,000 battery inverter from a camping store or online, and that'll keep your fridge running with a few lights. It'll charge your cell phone and your laptop. It'll probably go for 1.5 to 3 days depending on your fridge and your size. I find that's really handy when I strap it to a hand truck, because then I can run all my electric yard tools all weekend and I can use it all the time. And then in an outage, I can drag it up into my apartment and run the fridge and the lights and the laptop. That's all I do. So that's what the CEO of Sonoma Clean Power does in his house is not a fancy system. It's a camping inverter. I back it up with a tiny little inverter that I'll plug into my electric car if that one runs out, and I'll run an extension cord up to my apartment, and I'll keep the fridge running, and my car will run my fridge for 5 days, and the lights and laptop and everything else. So
are you saying that works instead of a generator, an inverter?
It's in lieu of a generator. Now, it doesn't run everything in your house. It's running a power strip, right? And
what if I'm only trying to run lights until I go to bed?
So like if your lights are LED or if they're otherwise pretty energy efficient, then you can run a lot of lights on an inverter and a battery system. And so like I just want to communicate, like, you don't have to spend $25,000 on a fancy battery system to back up your whole house. You can, and if you have the money, like it's pretty slick. Like you can do things that don't even have an outage at all. Like the grid can go down and you don't even know it. Your lights are still on. But a lot of people don't have that resource and don't need it. And so like if you can be okay with an hour of your power being out while you go fetch your battery and haul it into your house, like, all right, you know, that's an option. I just wanted to say, like, we don't have to get fancy. We can do things in a way that's just a little bit simpler sometimes.
At the Advanced Energy Center, which, by the way, if you're down in Santa Rosa, any of you, it's a wonderful place to just go and visit and get all sorts of ideas. But I remember there was a battery backup thing that sounded like a pretty good deal there that was, I think, subsidized or low cost anyway. Is that available?
It is, and there are quite a few others too. So that's just an example of a battery system. And truthfully, the federal incentives that just came out recently do provide some money for battery systems as well. So I think that could be another option, is to look at that. So I don't want to poo-poo it too much. I just want to say, like, everyone can have access to some of these benefits, regardless of income.
Oh, okay. And I see Chuck has his hand up too. Okay, after them, I'll have my own personal question. Peggy, where are you?
Okay, I wanted to know more how it would work if a lot of people who had solar with battery backup agreed to make some of their power either from their EV or from a battery associated with their PV panels, to be able to do load shaving and stuff like that to help whatever utility they're tied into, assuming that they're grid tied, meet the demands like the recent period that we had with the extra heat. So I'd like to know more about how that works and how you'd set that up. And is it even a good idea for the people who have EVs and other batteries to try to get into a network where that's possible? That's one question. And the other is going back to how we as a state avoid getting in a pickle over and over again. It seems to me that the main problem isn't the PUC, it's the for-profit utilities. And that especially the next time one of them wants to go bankrupt, I think we should let them permanently and pull their corporate charter and turn that whole thing into what they currently have into publicly owned assets. And that if we could do that to the three big utilities that are for profit, I think we could then reconstitute the PUC in a way that they might be more responsible.
Peggy for president. I'm just going to say Peggy for president. So, like, you know, you're speaking truth, right? And the problem is, PG&E's first bankruptcy, they got guaranteed cost recovery. PG&E's second bankruptcy, they got $21 billion of free insurance. So PG&E has been told by lawmakers and by the governor and by the PUC, you should plan for having more bankruptcies.
Right. Yeah.
Because every time they go bankrupt, they win.
Right.
Big,
yeah.
like really big.
It's like winning the lottery.
So my view is the way to save PG&E is to put a plan together at a very high level in the state, in front of the governor and everyone, that says, here's exactly what we're going to do when you go bankrupt the third time, and here's exactly how we're going to replace you. And then they will finally shape up. that's what's going to happen, right? Because they don't want to go out of business. And honestly, there's probably 20,000 great people who work for them who want to do the right thing, but they're being told they can't because every time they go bankrupt, they make a profit. So I think we have to put a plan together that says, here's what we're going to do if you fail the third time. And here's exactly how we're going to socialize and benefit the public when you fail. So like, I'm with you. Let's do it.
Okay. Okay.
Great
And you
answers.
know what? Some people,
And great question.
some people even started the plan. I mean, they called it Golden State Power and Light, and they were like, okay, we're just gonna we're gonna name it. We're gonna name the directors. We're gonna figure it all out now. And so, I mean, you're not saying anything nuts. I think it's the right plan.
And what about
Thank
this
you.
idea of people who have electric vehicles or batteries with the solar on the roof?
I'm happy to answer, but I know I've been talking a lot. So Keith, do you want to jump in on that one?
And then we're going to call on Chuck after that. Okay.
Well, you know, the solar on a car is an okay idea, but there's a lot of things. I mean, a car takes a lot of electricity. Solar panels don't put out a lot of electricity. But, for example, like in my case, if I park my car at my house and it's in the sun, if I had solar panels on the top of it, I could leave it there for a couple of days. I don't go out every day and charge the batteries up, and it could go. The things you're seeing are more for like interior kinds of things, you know, your fans and lights and things like that. It's more of an accessory kind of an item because it really does take more power than what a solar panel can put out. So I think it's more of I don't think we're ever going to see a purely solar-powered car. I mean, SEER, when we started in 1990, there was the Sun Race, they called it. And the Sun Racers it's an international competition, and it was all completely 100% solar-powered cars, you know, and so you can do that, but you had to see these things. They were something you wouldn't want to drive on the highway, you know, but it proved the concept. But I think the more important thing is put solar where the sunshine is really good and make electricity where you get a good solar access and you can really screw the panels down and such, and then charge your car or charge your house or charge your whatever through the grid. So electricity is really nice. It moves the speed of light, moves right through that wire, so it's easy to distribute the power. It's harder to find a place to put a battery, harder to find a place to put a solar panel. So those should, you know, sort of go where they can go best.
I think that Peggy's question, though, is more like if you have stored energy in batteries from your solar or in your car, when you're not using it, is there some way that those could be hooked into the grid to alleviate power surges at
Sorry,
times?
I didn't get that part of the question. I thought that's the original part was smart grid. I mean, I think, you know, Geof could talk about that too. The whole idea is the grid signals. If we all had our cars connected to the grid at work or at the shopping mall or wherever it is, and if you had a battery pack at your house that was connected to the smart grid, all your appliances are connected to the smart grid, then it could operate in terms of signals like that. So you could say, hey, my solar's already charged my house battery, I'm full, and my car has already had its battery charged up and I still got some. How about if I feed this into the grid? And you know, and then the grid could also say, hey, you know what, we really need some power, and we see you've got a car battery full of storage and also a house battery full of storage. We want to buy some of that power from you, and so you get some of that taken out of your system. And that's where if you start seeing a schematic with every house has a little storage system in it, so there's just storage all over the place. I think, to me, that makes more sense than trying to get, in addition to having grid storage, but having stuff that people have at their homes makes them more independent. They can charge it with solar locally. You can have your car as another way to have a power. But yeah, that's definitely already, I believe, part of the plan, if not already implemented, of how you can feed power to and from your car. And I think businesses are mostly set up like that in a lot of the big urban areas, not so much here. Do you know anything about that, Geof?
I think that's exactly right.
Set up.
And actually, one of the tricks, however, is that feeding energy from a car into the grid requires an interconnection agreement, and that requires a PG&E study, and that requires 3 3 to 12 months of delay and a lot of risk. And so one of the things that we've been playing around with is what could we do without any backfeed into the grid? And so one of the exciting developments is, and we've been proving this up at our headquarters, is if we can just regulate the chargers to increase the speed of charging when there's lots of solar power and then decrease it when there's not much solar power on the grid, we can actually simulate a power plant without any backfeeding into the grid. So we can just have, in the industry, we call it regulating up and regulating down. And that gives us a tremendous amount of value without needing PG&E to be involved at all. So we can actually just do it right now. So we've got 30 car chargers every day that our cars are plugged into all day long, and then we decide when they get charged. So because they're plugged in all day, they don't have to move. And we use the cheapest residential chargers to do it. It actually ends up being much less expensive than using ChargePoint or some commercial entity. And the cost of electricity is much lower, and we end up getting a service. So it's actually kind of a cool model.
That's great. I see 2 questions, and we're getting close to the end of our time here. So Chuck, why don't you go next?
Yeah, okay. I'm just wondering about Ukiah. I'm within the limits of Ukiah, and Ukiah has its own sort of power sources. And I'm just wondering, how does this interface with the with your Sonoma County Energy Group there?
So first of all, you lucky duck, you happen to be in Ukiah City proper, and the other municipal utility we have in our territory is Healdsburg in Sonoma County. And the reason you're so lucky is your city actually owns and maintains all the power lines that are in your city. And the reason that's so important is your power rates are 30 to 50% lower than PG&E. So just for anybody out there who's feeling jealous, I'm in your camp. When you have a truly public power system, costs over time, and it doesn't happen instantly, but over 20 to 50 years, they decline pretty dramatically. And so as of last year, there wasn't a single public power provider in California whose rates were more than 70% of the cheapest for-profit power provider in the state. So the minimum discount for public power was 30% in California. If you were in a full public power provider, so a full muni, we're a partial muni. We're just generation, we're not power lines. And the sad part is we're only 30% of your bill. PG&E is 70%. And so the power lines are the vast majority of the cost. So we don't really interact with the munis legally or from a procurement standpoint, but we do meet with them routinely. And in fact, just last month, we had Mel Grandy, who's the former director of Ukiah's Power Enterprise, and Terry Crowley, head of Healdsburg, at our shop, and we were talking about them participating in our geothermal initiative. And they're very intrigued. There's no commitments anywhere yet because it's still early days, but it's there's a collegial interest in cooperating with each other, but I think that's all there is so far. So I'll leave it there.
All right.
Well, just in case people are getting too jealous of us in Ukiah, they better look at our sewage price. That's a problem.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Okay. Eileen, it's your turn now.
Yeah. Hi. We have a Tesla battery power wall or whatever it's called. And just recently they've proposed to us, and in fact, it was during that horrible heat wave week, if they if we would agree to them leaving us with 52% of our power, and they would take 48% and sell it to PG&E or give it to, I don't know how it worked, but that happened a couple of days during that week. So that's an answer to your question, Peggy. It actually, and in order to have a power wall, you need to go through that business, Geof, you were talking about, of agreeing, to back, whatever you call it, to the grid, send power back to the grid. So that's been pretty neat, I think. And you get to say whether you want to do that or not. Anytime they use it, it's not universal. I want to, I think we don't have too much time, but Geof, I really think that you've got a lot of power, so to speak, I think you're the director of all the CCAs, and I had tried to talk to you last week about having all of the state CCAs make a stance with the CPUC about this rooftop solar business. But there are also other places, and as a group of community choice aggregates, it seems to me that you could use that power strongly, and you have a lot of customers behind you. I appreciate the fact I get so many emails asking for money and to support this and to sign that petition, but the community choice aggregates could really tap into all of us and have a voice in this state. So thank you.
I appreciate that, and I agree with it. And I think so. One small correction: I was the past chair last year of the statewide trade association. I'm no longer the chair, but I'm still actively involved. And I think one of the things that came up, just to maybe explain some of the reticence to being out front with the rooftop solar issue, is that it was our assessment and the assessment of the statewide CCA association that we were in the middle of two equally valid fights, and they had opposite sides of the spectrum. And the two sides were ratepayer advocates for people in poverty who reasonably and very convincingly argued that poor people, because of a flaw in regulation, were subsidizing wealthy people for getting solar power. That was not inherent to the issue of solar power, but it was an artifact of the way the regulation was set up. And we agreed with them. We looked at their analysis and we agreed. At the same time, we were fighting to solve the climate crisis and recognize that solar power needed to be accelerated even beyond its current pace. And any harm or financial consequence to slowing down that industry was going to hurt our cause. And so, in consultation with our board and our executive committee, we agreed that we were going to fight this middle path, which was for the longer term solution immediately, which was for baseload renewables and storage, to Keith's point, right now, and really get outraged that things like, we just saw in the last month that an entire complete blanket environmental exemption was granted to the only nuclear power plant operating in California. And no similar exemption was granted to solar or wind or geothermal or small stream hydro or other cleaner power sources. And that's BS. Like, we can't do that as a state. I understand Gavin Newsom wants to run for governor, and God bless him, I hope he wins. but like we have to have a more coherent policy around the whole picture. And so like I take your point. I agree with it, and I think we have to advocate strongly. But I also wanted to share some of that background, which is like we were very much interested in trying to advocate for solar and low rates and a rational system that makes sense. And truthfully, there's like 5 or 10 or 20 things that we could be doing to value solar for residential customers that we're not doing as a state. And the biggest thing we could probably be doing is saying, put workplace EV charging everywhere, because if there was a demand for middle of the day power, residential solar would be economically valuable inherently. And then we wouldn't have to have subsidies. There'd be no need for a subsidy. And I think we need to think through those kind of meta solutions, those kind of high level things that solve the problem, and not just subsidize everything without thinking about how to avoid the subsidy. Because I mean, we're a rich state, kind of, but like there's limits. So like, you know, we're not, we can't depend on that. Like we're looking at a recession potentially in the next couple of years, and I think it's good to think through that in advance. So anyway, sorry to end on a bummer note.
No, actually, that looking for meta solutions is really important, and I think this whole forum has been really, really informative and interesting. And I want to very much thank our two main speakers here, Geof Syphers, the CEO of the Sonoma Clean Power, and Keith Rutledge, who is the director of REDI, the Renewable Energy Development Institute. And both of them are just invaluable resources to us. And I still have a question, but I think we need to end and get back to our evening, whatever. But I really appreciate a lot of very good questions from the audience and from our two speakers. And also, just again, if you aren't a member of Willits Economic Localization, we'd love to have your support. Oh, and also I want to announce that on October 9th, which is a Sunday, from 2 to 5, we will be having a candidates and election forum live in person at the Little Lake Grange. And we will have the 7 candidates for the Willits School District, and we'll also have a speaker on each of the 2 sales tax measures, Measure O for the libraries and Measure P for fire prevention and fighting. And so those 2 will be at 2 o'clock, and we'll have someone answering questions about those 2 things, including John Haschek, who just joined us. And then starting at 3, we'll have the 7, or at least 6 of the 7 candidates who are competing for 3 seats on the Willits School Board. So that should be interesting. John, did you want to add a note? We're just getting ready to end this meeting.
Anyway, I look
All right.
forward to
Well,
that
I'm glad you
October
can.
9th forum.
And thanks again to everybody for participating and doing what you can to reduce our fossil fuel output and to save us money and do the right thing. And boy, Geof, I love the way you kind of, see both sides and try to find a solution that works for the greatest good. Thank you all.
Thanks so much for inviting Keith and I today. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Sorry that.
Great program.
Thank you.
Thank you.